Alright, what's up guys? So we are now moving on to 1.4, and 1.4, 1.5, and 1.6 are going to deal with logic, which is going to be being logical throughout geometry. And so the way we're going to do this is the first thing on 1.4, we're going to learn about something called conditional statements. So in your vocabulary, we learned that conditional statements are known as an if and then statement. So that means if your sentence deals with if and then, this is going to be known as a conditional statement. So if P, then Q. So an if and then statement is known as a conditional statement. So within this conditional statement, there are pieces within it that we need to recognize, so that will help me with other parts of my logical statements here. So the first thing we're going to point out is exactly what is the hypotenuse. The hypothesis of my conditional statement always comes after the if. So right now I have the word if here, and whatever comes after that is going to be my hypothesis. So right here, ladies and gentlemen, if I live in Texas, I live in Texas here is going to be my hypothesis. Okay? The next thing in your vocabulary, we have the conclusion. So that happens at the end. And so conclusion always happens after then. So hypothesis is after the if. The conclusion is after the then. So I'm a Texan is going to be my conclusion. That's my pieces that I need to point out. Okay? So the next thing in your vocabulary, we have something called truth value. So what that means is whenever I have a conditional statement, it's either going to be true or false, and that's going to be your truth value. So right now, if I live in Texas, then I'm a Texan. Okay? So in my definition, if you're a Texan, that means that you were born and raised in Texas. So right now, if I live in Texas, people from California always move to Texas every day, so they live in Texas. So that doesn't make them an automatic Texan in my book. So then I'm going to go ahead and say the truth value to this is going to be false. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And then lastly, so this is my conditional statement. And so now on your last definition, you have something called the converse. And it says here, your converse, you're basically going to take the hypothesis and you're going to take the conclusion and you are going to swap it. So now if we look here, my conclusion means I'm going to take the hypothesis and my conclusion on converse and I'm going to swap those two. So I'm literally going to rewrite my if and then statement and I'm going to write the conclusion where the hypothesis is, and then I'm going to write the hypothesis where the conclusion is. So right now, if I'm a Texan, so I put the conclusion right here, then I live in Texas, and I put the hypothesis right here. So this is going to be known as the converse of your conditional statement, ladies and gentlemen. So now what you're going to do is you're going to go through and you're basically going to do the examples and you're going to look and create conditional statements, point out the hypothesis conclusion, and then you're going to end up writing the converse. Alright guys, so let's go and look at example number 1. So on example number 1, it tells me, it wants me to circle the hypothesis and underline the conclusion, then rewrite each below and identify the truth value of the statement. So let's go ahead and do this. So the first thing I need to do is I need to circle and rewrite the hypothesis. So right now, if you are older than 12, then you are a teenager. So I told you guys earlier, whatever comes after the if is always your hypothesis. So right here, after the if, you are older than 12. This is going to be known as your hypothesis. So go ahead and circle that in your notes right now. That comes right after the if. Okay? And then rewrite that later. So next, we're going to point out the conclusion. So I told you earlier, anything that comes after the then is always your conclusion. So then you are a teenager is going to be known as your conclusion. Okay? And so now that we know the hypothesis and we know the conclusion, it now wants you to state what the truth value is. So let's go ahead and read this. If you are older than 12, then you are a teenager. So let's think. If I'm older than 12, 13 through 19 would make me a teenager, but technically I'm 29 years old and I'm older than 12 years old. So then that makes this not true. It's a truth value is going to be false because I'm 29 and I'm older than 12. So then that makes sense there. So that's your hypothesis and that's your conclusion. Alright guys, so let's look at example number 2. So it says on example number 2, all it wants me to do is point out the hypothesis, point out the conclusion, and tell me what the truth value is. So let's go and look at this statement here. This is a conditional statement because it's an if and then statement. And let's go and look at it. So if x equals 5, then x squared equals 25. So I told you guys, anything that comes after the if is always your hypothesis. And you'll rewrite that on your paper. Then anything that comes after then is always your conclusion. So then you'll write that in your paper. And let's go ahead and test the truth value of this. So if I took x equals 5 and I plugged it in for x, so 5 times 5 is obviously 25, then that would make this true. So the truth value of this statement is going to be true. Alright guys, let's go and look at example number 3. So on example number 3 it tells me, it says, a geometry student is a math student. It wants you to start by rewriting this statement as a conditional. It is not a conditional statement the way it is written because there is no if and then. So it wants us to write it as a conditional, then it wants us to point out the hypothesis, the conclusion, and the truth value. So let's go and look at this. So I need to go and implant if and then. So I'm going to go and write the words if here. And I need to figure out. So if a so I can put if a student takes geometry, then they are a math student. So let's go and put that. So if a geometry student, or if a geometry, if a student takes geometry, if a student is in geometry, then they are a math student. So if you look right here, I've just now made an if and then statement. I've changed this statement into a conditional by adding if and then. So you're going to put that down in your notes on your paper. So now let's go ahead and point out what's my hypothesis and what's my conclusion. So right now I'm stating if, anything after if is always your hypothesis. So this is my hypothesis, and you're going to write that down in your notes. And then anything after then is always your conclusion. So right here, then, this is going to be my conclusion, because it comes after then. So let's go and check my truth value. If a student is in geometry, then they are a math student. So I'm going to go ahead and say the truth value of that is going to be true, because if you're in my geometry class, then yes, you are a geometry student, or you are a math student. So that there, ladies and gentlemen, that's example number 3. Okay, and then lastly, we have example 4 and example 5. They're kind of doing the same thing, so I decided to tie them together. So in example number 4, it tells me to write the converse of the conditional statement, then identify the new truth value. What you need to remember, all you're going to do is you're going to take the hypothesis and the conclusion and swap them. So right now, after the if is always my hypothesis, and after the then is always your conclusion. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to swap these two back and forth and rewrite my statement. So what my converse of my conditional statement should say is, if you are a teenager, then you are older than 12. So all I did was I swapped them there, okay? Now let's go ahead and see if it changed the truth value. Earlier I said it was false, because obviously I'm older than 12. And so now let's see if it changed. If you are a teenager, then you are older than 12. So yeah, if you're 13, you're a teenager, you're going to be older than 12. So now the converse changed the truth value to true, okay? Let's go ahead and see if it happened on example number 5. So on example number 5, it says, if x equals 5, then x squared equals 25. So let's go and check this out. After the if is going to be my hypothesis. After the then is going to be my conclusion. So let's write the converse by swapping them. All I'm going to do is change them out. Swap them. Switch them. So my statement should be if x squared equals 25, then x equals 5. So basically, if I took the equation and tried to solve for x, I then would work it out and get x equals 5. So what that means when I switch the converse, that means the truth value of this is also going to be true. So ladies and gentlemen, that is how you take the hypothesis conclusion and swap it to make the converse.